January 15th, 1978. 3:00 a.m. The Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University sits quiet in the darkness. Inside, college students sleep peacefully, completely unaware that evil itself is about to walk through their door. A man in a blue knit cap creeps through the hallway. In his hand, a wooden club. In the next 15 minutes, he will brutally murder 2 young women and attack 2 others. But here's what makes this night even more terrifying. This wasn't his first time, or his second, or even his 10th. The man in that sorority house was Ted Bundy, and by that night, he had already killed at least 20 women, maybe more. Some experts believe over 100. But Ted Bundy wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in a Colorado jail cell. Instead, he had done the impossible. Twice. He had escaped. Twice. And now, he was on the deadliest rampage of his career. This is the story of America's most infamous serial killer, a man so charming, so intelligent, so normal-looking, that even when police caught him, they didn't believe he could be the monster he truly was. Act 1. The Secret begins, 1:38. Before Ted Bundy became America's most notorious serial killer, he was Theodore Robert Carole, born November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. But his life began with a lie that would shape everything that followed. His mother, Eleanor Louise Carole, just 22 years old, gave birth to Ted at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. In 1946, having a child out of wedlock was considered shameful, especially for a deeply religious family. The identity of Ted's biological father remains a mystery to this day. His birth certificate listed an Air Force veteran named Lloyd Marshall, but Ted's mother later claimed it was a sailor named Jack Worthington, a man authorities believe never existed. But here's where the story gets even darker. Some believe Ted's grandfather, Samuel Carole, was actually his biological father, that Ted was the product of incest. While this was never proven, what is documented is that Samuel Carole was a violent, abusive man with a vicious temper. To hide the scandal, the family made a decision that would haunt Ted for the rest of his life. They told everyone, including Ted, that his grandparents were his parents, and that his mother was his sister. For the first few years of his life, Ted Bundy grew up believing a complete fabrication about who he was. But there were warning signs, terrifying warning signs that everyone missed. Ted's Aunt Julia later revealed something chilling. She would wake up multiple times to find 3-year-old Ted standing by her bed, placing kitchen knives under her covers, and smiling. A childhood neighbor, Sandy Holt, remembered Ted as a mean-spirited kid who liked to inflict pain and suffering and fear. She described how Ted would dig holes in the woods, line them with sharpened stakes, cover them with vegetation, and wait for children to fall in. At least one girl was seriously injured. Ted called them his tiger traps, but it gets worse. According to witnesses, Ted would torture and kill animals. He once hung a cat from a clothesline and set it on fire. He would take younger children into the woods, force them to strip, and terrorize them. Neighbors could hear their screams for blocks. And his grandfather, the man Ted believed was his father, kept a collection of violent pornography in the greenhouse. Ted, as young as 3 or 4 years old, would sneak out there and spend hours looking at these graphic, disturbing images. By age 13, Ted discovered the truth about his birth. Accounts differ on exactly how. Some say a cousin cruelly showed him his birth certificate, calling him a bastard. Others say he found it himself. But the revelation left Ted with a deep, burning resentment toward his mother for lying to him his entire childhood. When Ted's mother moved to Tacoma, Washington, and married Johnny Bundy, a military cook. Ted refused to accept his stepfather. He wouldn't call him Dad, he called him John. He was embarrassed by John's modest income, his practical Rambler car. Even as a child, Ted wanted expensive things: status, recognition, transition. On the surface, Ted became a model citizen. He went to church. He was vice president of the Methodist Youth Fellowship. He even once saved a friend's niece from drowning. But behind this mask, darkness was growing. As a teenager, Ted became a voyeur, a peeping Tom, spying on women through their windows. He shoplifted expensive ski equipment. He forged lift tickets. He attempted to steal cars. By 18, he had a juvenile record for theft that was sealed when he became an adult. But no one suspected what Ted would become. Because by the time he reached college, Ted Bundy had perfected something dangerous: the ability to appear completely, utterly normal. By the early 1970s, Ted Bundy seemed to have it all. He was handsome, charming, charismatic. He was attending the University of Washington, studying psychology. He had worked at a suicide crisis hotline, ironically alongside future true crime writer Ann Rule, who would later write the best-selling book, The Stranger Beside Me, about the man she thought she knew. Ted had girlfriends, friends, a promising future in law or politics. Everyone who knew him described him the same way: intelligent, engaging, well-spoken, the last person you'd ever suspect of violence. But what no one knew was that Ted Bundy had discovered something about himself, something he would later describe in his own chilling words. He had found that he enjoyed possessing, controlling, and ultimately destroying human life. The killings began in 1974, though some experts believe Ted started much earlier, possibly as a teenager. What we know for certain is that on January 4, 1974, Ted Bundy entered the basement apartment of University of Washington student Karen Sparks while she slept. He beat her savagely with a metal rod. Karen survived, but suffered permanent brain damage. 1 month later, February 1, 1974, University of Washington student Linda Ann Healy, 21 years old, known in the community for giving the weekday ski report on the radio, disappeared from her apartment in the middle of the night. Her bed was carefully made, but blood soaked the pillow. Blood stained her nightgown. But Linda was gone. Her remains wouldn't be found for a year, dumped on Taylor Mountain outside Seattle, alongside the bodies of other victims. And then the disappearances began accelerating. Throughout 1974, young women across Washington and Oregon started vanishing without a trace. They all shared a disturbing similarity: attractive, white women in their late teens or early 20s, with long, dark hair parted in the middle. Ted Bundy had developed a method, a horrifying, effective system for hunting human beings. He would remove the passenger seat from his tan Volkswagen Beetle, creating an empty space on the floor. He would wear a fake cast on his arm or leg, sometimes use crutches. Then he would approach his target, usually in a public place, and ask for help carrying books or loading something into his car. He was handsome. He was polite. He seemed injured and vulnerable. Who would refuse to help? But once the victim got close to his Volkswagen, Ted would strike them over the head with a crowbar, immediately rendering them unconscious. He would force them into the empty passenger space, hidden from view. Then he would handcuff them and drive to a remote location. What happened next was unspeakable. Ted would rape his victims, strangle them, or bludgeon them to death. Then, in acts that demonstrate the true depths of his depravity, he would return to their bodies, sometimes for days or weeks, to groom them, apply makeup, and perform sexual acts with their corpses. He continued this necrophilia until decomposition and wild animals made it impossible. In his later confessions, Ted described this compulsion in his own words: The ultimate possession was, in fact, the taking of the life, and then the physical possession of the remains. July 14, 1974, Lake Sammamish State Park, near Seattle. A sunny Sunday, families enjoying the summer day. Among them, young women sunbathing, reading, relaxing, and Ted Bundy, wearing a white tennis outfit, his arm in a sling, approaching women and introducing himself as Ted. "Excuse me," he would say with a charming smile. "I need help loading my sailboat onto my car. Would you mind?" Several women refused, but 23-year-old Janice Ann Ott agreed. She walked with him toward the parking lot. Multiple witnesses saw her leave with a man named Ted. 4 hours later, 19-year-old Denise Marie Naslund left a picnic to use the restroom. She never returned. In one of his most disturbing confessions, Ted later revealed what happened that day. He brought Denise back to where he was holding Janice. He forced one woman to watch as he assaulted and murdered the other. Both women's remains were found months later, dumped in a remote wooded area. But Ted Bundy had made a mistake. Multiple witnesses at Lake Sammamish had seen him. They described a handsome young man with his arm in a sling, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle, who introduced himself as Ted. Police created composite sketches. They distributed flyers. And one person who saw those flyers was Elizabeth Kloepfer, Ted's girlfriend. She didn't want to believe it. The man she loved couldn't be a killer, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The car matched. The name matched. The timeline matched. In November 1974, Elizabeth Kloepfer called the police. She told them about Ted Bundy. But here's the thing. Ted Bundy didn't look like a serial killer. He was educated, well-spoken, charming. He had a girlfriend. He volunteered at a crisis hotline. Detectives couldn't make themselves believe that this was their suspect, so Ted's name went on a list, along with hundreds of other names, and he remained free. Free to continue killing. In September 1974, Ted Bundy moved to Salt Lake City, Utah to attend law school, and the murders followed him. Within weeks, young women in Utah, Idaho, and Colorado began disappearing. The pattern was identical, same victim profile, same modus operandi. But now Ted was operating across multiple states, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement agencies to connect the cases. November 8, 1974, Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. 18-year-old Carole was shopping when a man approached her. He was well-dressed, handsome, official-looking. "I'm Officer Roseland with the Murray Police Department," he said. "Someone tried to break into your car. I need you to come with me to identify if anything was stolen." Carole, trusting the polite officer, agreed. He led her to his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle, but as soon as they were inside, everything changed. The man pulled out handcuffs. He tried to force them onto her wrists. Carole fought back. She kicked. She screamed. She managed to open the door and fall out of the moving vehicle. Carole had just escaped Ted Bundy, and she could identify him. August 16, 1975. A Utah Highway Patrol officer noticed a Volkswagen Beetle driving suspiciously through a residential area at 2:30 a.m., weaving lights off. He pulled it over. The driver was polite, cooperative. But when the officer looked inside the car, his blood ran cold. Handcuffs, a crowbar, a ski mask, ice pick, rope, trash bags, a pantyhose mask with eye holes cut out. The driver's name? Ted Bundy. When Carole was shown a photo lineup, she identified Ted without hesitation. On February 23, 1976, Ted Bundy was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But investigators now had a bigger problem. They were connecting Ted to murders across multiple states. Colorado wanted him for the murder of Karen Campbell, a nurse who had disappeared from a ski resort in January 1975. In June 1977, Ted was transferred to Aspen, Colorado, for a preliminary hearing on the Campbell murder charge. During a break in the proceedings, Ted's lawyers left him alone in a law library on the second floor of the courthouse. Ted walked to a window, opened it, and jumped. He jogged down Main Street in broad daylight and disappeared into the mountains. The FBI immediately launched a massive manhunt. They issued wanted posters. They offered a $100,000 reward. But Ted had planned this carefully. He had camping gear stashed. He knew the terrain. For 6 days, Ted Bundy was free. But hunger and cold eventually drove him back toward civilization. He broke into a cabin, and the owner spotted him. Police captured him on June 13, 1977. Ted Bundy went back to jail, but he wasn't finished. December 30th, 1977, New Year's Eve. While most people were celebrating, Ted Bundy was executing his second escape. He had lost significant weight on purpose. He had been studying the jail's architecture, and that night, he climbed through a light fixture opening in the ceiling of his cell, crawled through the ductwork, and dropped down into the jailer's office. Then, he walked out the front door. This time, Ted Bundy was prepared. He had a plan. He took a flight to Chicago, then an Amtrak train to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Then, he stole a car and drove to Atlanta. Finally, he took a bus to Florida. By January 8, 1978, Ted Bundy was in Tallahassee. He rented a room at a boarding house called The Oaks near Florida State University, and the FBI was desperately searching for him. On February 10, 1978, 1 month after Ted's escape, he was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. But by then, Ted Bundy had already committed the crimes that would finally end his reign of terror.
January 15th, 1978, 3 a.m. We are back where our story began, outside the Chi Omega sorority house. Ted Bundy had been in Tallahassee for exactly 1 week, and he was about to go on the most vicious rampage of his entire killing spree. The Chi Omega house sat just off the Florida State University campus, a large, historic building where 39 young women lived. It was considered safe. Parents felt their daughters were protected there. But that night, someone had left the back door unlocked. At 2:45 a.m., a man in a blue knit cap and dark clothing entered through that unlocked door. He carried a wooden club, a piece of oak firewood wrapped in cloth. A sound effect, footsteps, creaking floor. He moved through the darkened hallway. He opened the first bedroom door. Inside, 21-year-old Margaret Bowman was sleeping. The intruder struck her over the head with the club, then strangled her with a nylon stocking until she was dead. He moved to the next room. 20-year-old Lisa Levi was sleeping. He struck her with the club, strangled her, sexually assaulted her with a hairspray bottle, and in a final act of pure rage, he bit her on the buttock. That bite mark would be the key piece of evidence that would finally convict Ted Bundy. But the attack wasn't over. The intruder moved to another room where Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler were sleeping. He attacked both women with the club, fracturing Karen's skull and breaking nearly every bone in Kathy's face. Both women survived, barely. A sorority sister named Nita Neary had just returned home. As she entered the house, she saw a man running toward the door, clutching something wrapped in cloth. She caught only a glimpse of his face, but it was enough. She immediately called the police. A sound effect, police sirens. Officers arrived within minutes. What they found inside was a scene of unimaginable horror. Blood everywhere. 2 women dead. 2 others critically injured, fighting for their lives. Detective Ray Crew, one of the first responders, later said, "Never had we seen such a brutal attack." But Ted Bundy wasn't finished. In some kind of psychopathic frenzy, he ran from the Chi Omega house to an apartment building just blocks away on Dawoodi Street. He broke into the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, another FSU student, and beat her so severely that her skull was fractured, her jaw was broken, and a nerve to her ear was permanently severed. Cheryl survived, but she would live with disabilities for the rest of her life. And then, as the sun began to rise, Ted Bundy disappeared into the early morning darkness. For 3 weeks, investigators worked around the clock. They had Nita Neary's description. They had forensic evidence. But they didn't have their killer. Until February 9th, 1978. Transition. Ted Bundy had been in Jacksonville, Florida, looking for his next victim. He approached a 14-year-old girl but was frightened away. Frustrated, he started driving back toward Tallahassee in a stolen van. Near Lake City, Florida, he saw 12-year-old Kimberly Leach walking across the campus of Lake City Junior High School in the middle of the school day. Ted convinced Kimberly to get into his van. He drove her to a remote location, sexually assaulted her, and murdered her. Her body wouldn't be found for 2 months, hidden under a shed near the Sewanee River State Park. Kimberly Leach was Ted Bundy's youngest victim, and she would be his last. February 15th, 1978, 1:30 a.m. Pensacola, Florida. Police officer David Lee noticed an orange Volkswagen Beetle driving erratically down Cervantes Street with its headlights off. He pulled it over. The driver was cooperative at first, but when Officer Lee asked for identification, the man suddenly attacked him. They fought violently. The driver tried to escape, but Officer Lee managed to subdue him and get him into the patrol car. At the police station, the man refused to identify himself, but his fingerprints matched the FBI's fugitive database. The most wanted man in America had finally been caught. The driver was Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's trials would become a media spectacle unlike anything America had ever seen. This was 1979, and it was the first murder trial ever broadcast nationally on television. The trial for the Chi Omega murders began in June 1979 in Miami. Over 250 reporters from 5 continents descended on the courthouse. And Ted Bundy, ever the narcissist, loved every second of the attention. He insisted on representing himself in court, acting as his own attorney. His legal team begged him to accept a plea deal, 75 years in prison instead of the death penalty. All he had to do was plead guilty. Ted refused. He believed he could charm the jury, convince them of his innocence. After all, he had charmed everyone else his entire life. But this time, the evidence was overwhelming. Nita Neary took the stand and identified Ted as the man she saw fleeing the Chi Omega house. Hair fibers found at the scene matched Ted's hair. Clothing fibers linked him to the crime scene. Transition, but the most damning evidence was the bite mark. On Lisa Levy's left buttock, investigators had found a distinctive bite pattern. Forensic odontologists Dr. Richard Suvine and Dr. Lowell Levine studied the mark carefully. They compared it to dental impressions taken from Ted Bundy's teeth. In court, Dr. Suvine presented enlarged photographs of the bite mark next to enlarged photos of Ted's dental impression. He explained to the jury that human teeth are unique as fingerprints. And this bite mark showed something incredibly distinctive. Ted's teeth were crooked, with gaps and irregular spacing. Dramatic pause. There appeared to be no doubt, Dr. Suvine testified, that Bundy had left his mark on this victim. Prosecutor Larry Simpson later explained, "I think the bite mark, itself, is indicative of the primal rage that Mr. Bundy must have been in at the time that he committed those murders. It was just a total homicidal rage." The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. On July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of burglary. Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death. But there was one more trial to come. In January 1980, Ted stood trial for the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The prosecution presented eyewitness testimony from a firefighter who had seen Ted leading Kimberly to his van. They presented matching clothing fibers found on both Ted and Kimberly's body. And during this trial, something bizarre happened. Pause for impact. Ted's girlfriend, Carole Boone, was testifying as a character witness. In the middle of her testimony, Ted asked her to marry him. She said yes. And because they declared their vows in front of a judge and notary, the marriage was legal under Florida law. Carole would later give birth to Ted's daughter, Rose, in 1982, conceived during prison visits where Ted allegedly bribed guards to allow conjugal time. Transition sound. On February 10, 1980, Ted Bundy received his 3rd death sentence for Kimberly's murder. For the next 9 years, Ted exhausted every legal appeal. He hired lawyers. He fought his convictions in court after court. He offered to confess to more murders in exchange for more time. but the appeals kept failing. By 1989, Ted Bundy had run out of options. January 17, 1989. The United States Supreme Court denied Ted Bundy's final appeal. Governor Bob Martinez signed the death warrant. The execution was set for January 24, 1989, at 7 a.m. Ted Bundy had exactly 7 days to live. As death approached, Ted suddenly wanted to talk. After years of denials, he finally began confessing. He met with FBI agent Bill Hagmaier and other investigators, describing murders in detail, but only gradually, carefully, always holding back just enough information to try to buy more time. Bundy was trying to string the investigators along, one reporter wrote, tempt them, turn them into levers for his cause. It became a delicate dance. He walked up to the edge of a full confession, then demanded more time. His plan was called Bones for Time. Reveal the locations of missing victims' remains in exchange for stays of execution. Some families of victims begged Florida Governor Bob Martinez to delay the execution so Ted could provide closure. Every family refused to help. The families already believed that the victims were dead and that Ted had killed them, one investigator wrote. They didn't need his confession. Governor Martinez made his position clear. We are not going to have the system manipulated. For him to be negotiating for his life over the bodies of victims is despicable. January 23, 1989. Ted Bundy's final night alive. He was interviewed by Reverend James Dobson, a religious broadcaster. Ted, now 42 years old, sat in his prison cell and wept. He told Dobson he took full responsibility for his crimes, but then tried to shift blame, claiming pornography was the root cause of his violence. My experience with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality is that once you become addicted to it, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of materials. Many experts believe this was just another manipulation, Ted's final attempt to control the narrative, to blame someone or something else for the monster he chose to become. That night, Ted called his mother, Louise, twice. He apologized to her. I'm so sorry I've given you all such grief, but a part of me was hidden all the time. Louise's final words to her son were, "You'll always be my precious son." She did not attend the execution. She couldn't bear to watch her son die. Ted spent the rest of the night praying with Methodist minister Fred Lawrence. He wept. He talked of suicide. He didn't want to give the state the satisfaction of watching him die. He refused his last meal. January 24, 1989. Dawn broke over Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. Outside the prison, hundreds of people had gathered. But they weren't there to mourn. They were there to celebrate. They wore t-shirts that said Burn Bundy and Toast Ted and Friday. They drank beer and coffee. They ate donuts. They chanted and cheered. Fireworks went off. One person held up a bedsheet spray-painted with the words, "I like my Ted well done." It was a carnival atmosphere, a release of rage and fear from a nation that had been terrorized by this man for over a decade. Inside the prison, Ted Bundy was led into the execution chamber at 7:06 a.m. He wore blue slacks and a pale blue shirt. His arms and legs were strapped to the electric chair. A thick leather strap was pulled across his mouth and chin. Witnesses later reported that Ted looked white as a sheet, terrified. Prison Superintendent Tom Barton asked if he had any final words. Ted's voice quavered. "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Long pause. Then a metal skullcap was bolted to his head. A heavy black veil fell over his face. At 7:06 a.m., the executioner threw the switch. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through Ted Bundy's body. At 7:16 a.m. on January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was pronounced dead at age 42. Outside the prison, when the announcement came, the crowd erupted in cheers. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders before his execution, but the true number of his victims remains unknown. Some investigators believe he killed more than 100 women. The exact count may never be known. After his execution, scientists removed Ted's brain to study it, searching for physical abnormalities that might explain his violence. They found nothing. No brain damage. No obvious defects. Ted Bundy's evil couldn't be explained by biology. His body was cremated in Gainesville, Florida. No public ceremony was held. His wife, Carole and Boone, divorced him in 1986 after finally accepting his guilt. She moved away with their daughter, Rose, and changed their names. To this day, Rose's whereabouts remain unknown. She's chosen to live her life away from the shadow of her father's crimes. Ted Bundy's impact on law enforcement and the criminal justice system was profound. His case exposed critical weaknesses in how different states communicated about crimes. This led to the creation of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, 6CAP, a database that helps law enforcement agencies across the country share information about serial crimes. His escapes from custody prompted major reforms in jail security and prisoner classification systems. The bite mark evidence used to convict him advanced the field of forensic odontology, though this science remains controversial today. And his crimes helped launch the victims' rights movement in America, leading to new laws protecting and supporting crime victims and their families. But perhaps the most important lesson from Ted Bundy's story is this: evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the charming, intelligent, well-spoken person sitting next to you, the person who seems completely normal. Ted Bundy used his appearance, his charm, and his intelligence as weapons. He exploited people's trust. He preyed on kindness. For over 4 years, he moved freely through American society, kidnapping, raping, and murdering dozens of young women whose only crime was being polite to a stranger who seemed to need help. The victims deserve to be remembered, not just as statistics in Ted Bundy's body count, but as real people with real lives. Linda and Healy, who gave the morning ski report on the radio and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Donna Gale Manson, a 19-year-old music student who loved to play the flute. Susan Rancourt, a biology major who wanted to become a veterinarian. Brenda Ball, a 22-year-old who was last seen leaving a tavern in Berrien, Washington. Georgianne Hawkins, an 18-year-old who vanished while walking back to her sorority house, just 40 feet from her door. Janice OTT, a 23-year-old probation caseworker who was helping troubled youth turn their lives around. Denise Naslund, studying to become a computer programmer. Karen Campbell, a nurse who disappeared from a ski resort while on vacation with her fiancé. Melissa Smith, a 17-year-old whose father was a police chief. Laura Aim, Deborah Kent, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliver-Son, Melanie Cooley, Lynette Culver. Margaret Bowman, a 21-year-old art history major at FSU who loved painting. Lisa Levi, a 20-year-old fashion merchandising student with a bright future ahead of her. And 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, a 7th grader who loved her family and had her whole life stolen from her. These women, and the many others whose names we may never know, were daughters, sisters, friends. They had dreams. They had potential. They deserved to live. Ted Bundy stole all of that from them, and for that, he paid the ultimate price. But the story doesn't end with Ted Bundy's death, because what makes Ted Bundy's case truly unique and truly terrifying is what happened after the execution.
Quick question. How many people do you think need to hear this story? Think about your sister, your daughter, your friend who walks alone at night. Here's what I want you to do. Hit the share button. Send this to 3 people. Not because it's entertaining, but because it could literally save someone's life. Then comment "shared" so I know you did it.